Hello, everybody, and welcome to a video where I'm going to be breaking down my first impressions of the Flesh and Blood trading card game. Last weekend, I played in my first ever event, tried out the game so that I could share my experience with all of you because I was very curious about what it was like. I'd heard a lot of high praise from the professor at Tolarian Community College and LSV, and so I wanted to try it out. And then I figured I'd share my experience with you in case you were interested in trying the game yourself and were a little bit hesitant and didn't know if it was going to be a good fit for you or not. So this is just going to be my first impressions, and you'll maybe get a general sense for some of the differences between Magic the Gathering and Flesh and Blood, or at least my experience with the differences. So first off, I had a blast at the event. It was really fun, and I think that the community that I at least was playing with was very welcoming. And it seemed like that was something that the Flesh and Blood community maybe prided itself on, was being welcoming. And gotta be said, that's a really nice tenet to have. Like, oh yeah, we're the welcoming community, because they were very encouraging of helping me learn how to play and give me some extra tips. So basically, what I did was I was playing at FNM, and then I saw that there was going to be at the same shop a Flesh and Blood Armory event over the weekend. And Armory events are like the equivalent of FNM for Flesh and Blood, which is what I found out. And it was a draft event, which is also fun because I love drafting, and drafting seemed like a good entry point because I didn't need to have a deck, which is really nice as well. And I knew that I was going to lose, but it's fun to learn a new game, and I felt like I was learning a lot as I was playing, which is really cool. If you are thinking about trying the game and you're wondering about some of the differences between Magic the Gathering and Flesh and Blood, I will say that they feel like completely different games. It's not like Flesh and Blood is Magic the Gathering light or vice versa or something like that. It's a very separate experience. But if I was to explain it to you in Magic the Gathering terms, Flesh and Blood is essentially combat based, but all of the cards in your hand are simultaneously attackers, blockers, and mana at the same time. And so you have a lot of options every single turn on what you're going to do, because you draw back up to 4 cards every turn, and you don't have any like lands to slow you down. So all of your cards are action or the mana that you're going to use to cast your spells. So it's like you have a lot of optionality, and it feels like you have a lot of agency during the games, which is really fun. Obviously, there's variance because the cards you draw and the cards your opponents draw, sometimes they're going to line up poorly for you. Sometimes they're going to line up well for you. Sometimes it's going to depend on what you do, whether or not they line up well or poorly. But I will say that it felt like you have a lot of control, and that the better player is going to have an advantage, although they're not always going to win. Another thing that I found very interesting is just the pace of play. So in Magic the Gathering, there's a natural progression where you play a land every turn, and over time you start to make more powerful plays because you have more mana available to you. And then there's kind of a breaking point in the game a lot of times where you kind of know who's going to win. That doesn't always happen, but oftentimes it will, where there's like a big combat phase or a key removal spell. And then the game kind of like ends relatively shortly after. Flesh and Blood felt very action packed from the very beginning because you always start with your resources at like fully primed. It's not like you're playing a land every turn. It's more so that you start off with your like 4 card hand, and you just like you're always in go mode. Like you take your first turn, you have like all of the resources you're gonna have that you'll have on turn 6 or turn 7 pretty much. With a few exceptions, but basically you're starting off right in the thick of things, and that was a pretty cool thing that I liked about it too, where it's just like boom, you're in the action, which was really fun. And so it was a fun experience, and I think that it is something that is at least has my recommendation for trying out if you have a event at your local store or something like that. It seems like the sort of game where the people that you play with are going to be a huge determinant in how fun it is for you. But it seemed, based on my initial impression of the sampling that I had, that a lot of the people are very positive and really welcoming to new players. If you are going to try it out, I have a little thing based on some research I did after my experience. I wanted to see like the general cost of the game, because if I wanted to play in like let's just say the equivalent of standard, or like their modern format or whatever, a constructed format, because the formats for FNMs rotate. It's not always draft. Sometimes it's going to be a constructed format, and I wanted to see how much it would be to get a deck. And my conclusion based on some initial research is that it seems like in Flesh and Blood, the majority of cards are incredibly cheap. But then there's 1 or 2 cards that are very expensive because they get used in basically every deck. So the comparison, but the thing is that the expensive cards aren't like significantly better than the good cards, that are much cheaper. It's just that they're like strictly better. And so if you're trying to play in a competitive tournament, you kind of have to have the cards if you want to be optimizing your chance of winning. And an analogy that I kind of have come up with is if you want to get a competitive deck, you can get shock lands instead of dual lands and still have a very like competitive game against someone playing a top tier deck, but you're just like not optimizing for the highest level of competition if you're getting a shock land instead of a dual land. But in Magic the Gathering, as you know, a shock land might cost you like $10 and a dual land is going to cost you like 500. It's not quite that extreme in Flesh and Blood. It's like maybe it is kind of that extreme. There would be like a really competitive card that costs $150, but there's like a dollar card that's like roughly like a little bit like clearly weaker in power level, but still going to get the job done. So if you do want to play in a constructed tournament, I don't think you have to feel like you have to invest like $500 to get a competitive deck. You can probably throw a deck together for like $50 and still have like very competitive, intense games and have a total blast. And then if you go to a like big tournament, then obviously like if you're spending the time and effort to go to a massive tournament, then getting all of the cards to give yourself the best chance to win, that's probably something that would happen way down the road. And that's the sort of thing where it's just up to you how competitive you want to make your deck. But the general sense that I got was that you don't need to spend like $1,000 to get a competitive deck to enjoy playing the game, and that you can just really compete with like a lot of the really cheap cards. Well, because what I'm basing this on is I basically took all of the like I would take a like Google the top tier deck, put it into TCG Player, like import the whole deck list, and then remove like the 10 most expensive cards out of the 80 card deck list, and then the deck would be like $50, which is basically what I'm basing this on, because I did this for a bunch of decks because I was curious. And so yeah, the game doesn't seem that expensive to try out. It seems like you can get a competitive deck to play at your local events, and the community was really welcoming. So my overall conclusion was that it was really fun. I recommend trying it out yourself if you are interested, because even if you don't play it for a long, like more than once, it's a really fun experience, and I always just enjoy learning a new game and trying that sort of thing out. Anyway, I hope you found this video enjoyable. If you made it all the way to the end, leave hashtag first time Flesh and Blood in the comment section down below, and let me know if you're thinking about trying out the game yourself. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions, even though I'm a total noob and don't really know all of the answers necessarily, but I'm happy to share what I can. That's going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.